What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another highly combustible reaction. We're jumping into something awesome. Brahms' third, the bold opening movement of Brahms' Third Symphony. Definitely looking forward to the journey. Shout out to Brian for the request. Get over and show Richard Atkinson all the love in the world. Brian said, "Hey, Harley, we did one of Robert Schumann's four symphonies. The second, which was really his third and is my favorite. And today I wanted to introduce you to one of the four symphonies by Brahms, his third symphony, which is my personal favorite. However, this work benefits from some background and analysis prior to listening to it for the first time. This excellent video by composer slash forensic pathologist. That's a that's a wild combination. Richard Atkinson is a deep dive into just the first movement. He occasionally uses terminology that may be unfamiliar to the non-expert, but let me assure you that you can go with the flow and he'll take you along with him. I'm actually going to send you a much shorter education video after this one that covers the whole symphony at a much broader level, but because of how gifted Richard is at explaining complex ideas and using examples from other works, I think it makes sense to start with this deep dive. By the way, he uses an example from two Schubert works, both of which you have heard, the String Quintet and the 15th String Quartet, and both of which Brahms almost certainly was familiar with. Let's jump in, check it out together, see what we got. Go show Richard Atkinson the love. Let's go.
In this video, I'll continue my series on the Brahms symphonies by discussing the bold first movement of his magnificent Third Symphony in F major, composed in the summer of 1883. It begins, like the finale of his Fourth Symphony, with forceful chords played only by the winds, though in this case only 3 chords instead of 8. These chords harmonize the important 3-note motto, F, A flat, F, that will pervade large portions of this movement and will also return in future movements. We can see its importance already on the first page as it boldly announces the opening theme played by the violins, but accompanied by this same 3-note motto in the bass. Before going on, let's discuss the widespread idea that this 3-note motto is a musical cryptogram representing the words frei aber froh, or in English, free but glad or happy. In my last video, I discussed Brahms's third piano sonata, composed 30 years before this symphony, in which he quotes the motto of his friend, violinist Joseph Joachim, frei aber einsam, or in English, free but lonely.
We really are taking a deep dive now. We're talking about connections. We're talking about hidden cryptograms. I knew there was more to it. I knew there was things hidden in there.
And there's ample historical evidence that this was his actual personal motto, and that it was intentionally used as a musical cryptogram, most famously in the so-called FAE sonata for violin and piano, collaboratively composed for Joachim by Brahms, Schumann, and the other guy people always forget. The idea that Brahms adopted his friend's motto, but changed the lonely to glad, and that 30 years later he weaved it musically into his Third Symphony, comes from only one source, his friend and biographer Max Kalbeck, who didn't provide much convincing evidence for this claim. Even so, this has become accepted lore, and we see it in nearly every program note about this symphony. Anyone further interested in this topic should read this article that questions the validity of this narrative.
Oh, I feel like there are some rabbit holes that we can take now. I feel like I want to know some more. How many cryptograms, how many hidden things are there in classical music? I'm genuinely curious now.
But whether or not we accept the cryptogram idea, everyone can agree that the A is actually an A flat, which is interesting for a symphony in F major, since A flat is part of an F minor triad. This means the theme begins with an F major chord, immediately followed by an F minor chord, then a D flat major chord, the 6th chord of F minor, and finally a diminished 7th chord, giving this otherwise heroic opening theme an uneasy turbulence. Using a major to minor shift as an important thematic device reminds me of this terrifying percussive moment near the beginning of Mahler's Sixth Symphony that also plays an important role, pun intended, in the later movements. But it also reminds me of earlier pieces, like Schubert's final G major string quartet that immediately shifts from G major to G minor in its opening bars. And of course, in the finale, Schubert reverses this shift from G minor to G major. And while I'm talking about Schubert comparisons, notice that these three initial Brahms chords, first the tonic, then a diminished seventh chord to include the A flat, and then back to tonic, are the same chords that open Schubert's C major string quintet.
They all had a secret club.
Back to the symphony.
There had to have been some of these people knew each other. That's what I'm saying. Or at least were aware of one another. I wonder if they like put in sneaky little jabs at one another, or like seriously, like coded messages that only they would understand when they listen to it. I'm super like now. You got me wanting to go down and break out my tinfoil hat.
I've always considered
down the
this
rabbit
one of
hole.
Brahms's most rhythmically interesting compositions, and right off the bat we have hemiolas in the opening theme. In other words, even though the time signature is 6/4, meaning 2 beats of 3 subdivisions, it's easy to hear it instead as 3 beats of 2 subdivisions, at least until the next page when the actual duple meter becomes obvious. Remember that I called this theme from the finale of Brahms's First Symphony the Beethoven theme because of its similarity to the Ode to Joy theme from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And that Brahms himself acknowledged this similarity. In Brahms's Third Symphony, I find it nearly equally obvious that the distinctive rhythm and metric ambiguity we just heard in this opening theme were inspired by the opening theme of Schumann's Rhenish Symphony, number 3 in E-flat. Notice the virtually identical rhythm of at least this first portion, and also the similar hemiolas, now across the bar line since we're in 3/4, interspersed with bars in which we feel the actual triple meter. If that wasn't convincing enough, later in the recapitulation section of this Schumann movement, we hear this variant of the opening theme that's even more similar, in fact nearly identical to the Brahms theme. The opening falling fourth then morphs into the opening falling fourth of the second theme of this movement on the next page. Also, if you listen to Schumann's less famous First Symphony, You might notice at the end of this crescendo in the slow second movement, the sudden appearance of this same figure that sounds just like the Brahms theme.
It's very similar.
Back to Brahms, from now on I'm calling this opening theme the Schumann theme, and as you finally hear the rest of it, notice that on this second page, it's amazingly accompanied by 3 additional entries of the orange motto, now with an extra note at the end, and now in rhythmic diminution, so twice as fast, entering in C minor, the original F minor, and B flat minor, somehow all harmonizing this F major theme. Notice also that this final B-flat minor entry is syncopated, entering a quarter note's duration later than expected. The first violins now begin a modulatory passage that uses 2 additional entries of the orange motto, in A minor and then the original F minor, to modulate to the key of D flat major. The clarinet now repeats the passage with 2 more entries of the motto, in the original F minor and then C sharp minor, to modulate to A major, the key of the second subject. The stage has been set for the pastoral dance-like second theme, played first by the solo clarinet in a duet with the bassoon. Notice that we're in the mediant key of A major, not the dominant key of C major, and that we're now in compound triple meter, so 3 groups of 3. As you listen to just these first 4 bars, notice the rhythmic regularity of the folksy drone accompaniment played by the strings and flute on every subbeat. Despite this regular pulse of the drone accompaniment, this theme has fascinating metric quirks and seems almost improvised. I like to think of it as a mini theme in variations, with this first bar as the mini theme. So in the next bar, this final portion speeds up, followed by a confusing pump fake of the beginning of the theme on the wrong beat, followed by the real entry also on the wrong beat but in the other direction. However, since the rhythm of this portion is altered, it ends up metrically back on track by the end of the bar. We finally hear a much more varied version of the opening, and a slowed down version of this ending figure, now with an added chromatic note. The theme repeats on the next page with fuller orchestration, but now with this sped up portion becoming the counterpoint in the next bar, and with the slowed down portion suddenly shifting to staccato articulation at the end, with this whimsical extra note that sounds more like a grace note in most performances. Notice also that the lower part of the duet is now far more complex, with the same type of variation. For example, this portion is first varied rhythmically and compressed by a quarter note's duration, and then enters note for note the same, but twice as fast. The sudden staccato articulation we just heard introduces a new variant of the theme that begins with the staccato notes and continues with this portion of the original theme. I'm highlighting this initial portion red because this is the famous Brahms Symphony motif I've mentioned in multiple prior videos. This new variant enters by suddenly jumping to C sharp major, then repeats in B major, and the staccato portion then brings us back to A major as Brahms now inverts or turns upside down the original theme, accompanied by fragments of the upright version in this lush string interlude. We just heard the return of the orange motto in A minor, foreshadowing that the exposition section is about to end in A minor, and we've also switched back to 6/4 time, but notice that for the entire remainder of the exposition section after this rest, we perceive the meter as having shifted to the left by 1 quarter note, so it seems like these upward and downward arpeggio figures are entering on the beat. There's no obvious closing theme, just these arpeggiated figures and 2 more entries of the orange motto, also shifted to the left. Soon a crescendo begins, and the shifted groups of 3 suddenly become rhythmically jarring groups of 2. The confusion is resolved when the shifted groups of 3 return, now significantly varied and firmly in A minor, accompanied by 2 more entries of the orange motto, but now with an iambic rhythm, so long, short, long, short, long, short, long, short. This new rhythmic variant is reminiscent of the main theme from the first movement of his first symphony. Now listen up to this point when 2 more fragments of this variant begin another crescendo. This crescendoing upward chromatic scale leads to the final and angriest version of these groups of 3, with the shifted meter now emphasized by sforzato markings. More chromatic scales culminate in 2 final forceful figures in contrary motion, but notice that reorienting the listener to the true downbeat in the final bar requires this confusing, unexpected, and jarring extra note. The true downbeat is re-established with another pump fake, this time of the orange motto, introducing the full orange motto when the exposition section repeats. Back to the final page of the exposition, I have a special name for this phenomenon, the reorienting extra beat, and I have a whole list of my favorite examples for a future video someday. I already discussed one of the most entertaining of these from Haydn's Opus 50 No. 1 string quartet in this video 8 years ago, so please watch that if you haven't already. But since this video needs a Haydn tangent, let's hear another example from his Oxford Symphony, No. 92 in G, occurring in the trio section of the Minuet and Trio third movement. It begins with this syncopated horn and bassoon theme that by itself might seem to be starting on the downbeat. But with these orienting plucked downbeats from the strings, the syncopation and the true downbeats become obvious to the listener. The theme returns at the end exactly as we just heard it, and when it repeats, we still at first hear the orienting plucked downbeats, but suddenly the syncopated purple figures are combined with an also shifted upward scale. This continues, but now without the plucked downbeats, so after a few repetitions, our brains start perceiving the accented first beats of these figures to be the downbeat. After a dramatic shifted bar of rests, the section ends with 2 more shifted entries, now with the green figures inverted, and we finally hear the jarring, reorienting extra beat that jolts us back to the correct downbeat for this final cadence. Back to Brahms, if we quickly revisit that confusing moment when the shifted groups of 3 briefly became groups of 2, we hear another example of this phenomenon on a smaller scale, occurring within the larger scale example.
I think it's freaking awesome that people are able to break down classical music like this. I'm so damn intrigued. Normally, we just get a piece of music, we listen to it, and we talk about how it makes us feel, etc., etc. But there's so much more behind it. The people that can get in there and do their whole science breakdown. Like, this is damn near a scientific breakdown of music. He just has a way of talking. Sure, there's some words in there that I don't understand, but he still makes it easy for you to follow along. And he still threw little punches of humor in there. I could listen to him talk about classical music for hours. It's just very, very interesting. Looking at this page, I know their notes. I know when they're going up and I know when they're going down, but I couldn't tell you what notes they are. I don't know how to read sheet music. We're still in a learning phase of the whole classical music. We're still being introduced. There's so many things to be introduced to, but it's just fascinating to hear people break it down and compare it to other things and pull little pieces from other people's music and show how they're similar, show how they might have been inspired by one another. I think the whole thing is fascinating.
Before moving on, I should mention that my all-time favorite example of this phenomenon from any music that I included in this video 13 years ago comes from this very symphony's final movement, so stay tuned for when I revisit that moment later in this video series. Returning to where we left off in the first movement, when we finally get to the end of the repeat of the exposition section, instead of the first ending we just heard, Brahms begins the development section by repeating these figures several more times, extending the shifted meter to the reorienting extra beat at the end of this page, and modulating to the C-sharp minor entrance of the originally tranquil second subject, now completely transformed into a new agitated version, with this tense syncopated violin accompaniment, and with an extra to make the theme fit into the 6/4 time signature instead of its original 9/4 time signature. Finally, notice that these menacing marcato figures are just a transformation of this whimsical legato figure from the final bar of the original theme. The variant with the red portion now returns, but this time combined imitatively with its own inversion. In other words, the variant played upside down. The red portion was anticipated by the woodwinds in the prior bar, and was also hidden in the accompaniment of the section we just heard. The complex counterpoint with inversion continues, with these figures fragmenting into smaller and smaller pieces, eventually becoming just these single notes. This introduces the return of the orange motto, now as a gorgeous horn solo in the surprising new key of E-flat major. But notice that Brahms has now expanded it into a lyrical theme, the same kind of thematic fulfillment I discussed in the opening movement of the first symphony, when finally in the coda this other three-note motif that I highlighted purple in those videos is eventually expanded into a real theme of its own. The final bars of the development section bring back the Schumann theme for the first time since the opening page of the symphony, but now transformed from its original bold, explosive character to these mysterious pianissimo repetitions, played in octaves with no accompaniment. One of my favorite brilliant orchestration choices is this contrabassoon entry that makes the immediate shift from E-flat major to E-flat minor even more spooky, especially when it descends to this ridiculously low and amazingly creepy C-flat in the next bar. Remember that contrabassoons actually sound an octave lower than written. Brahms is known for his unconventional transitions to the recapitulation section, and this one is no exception. In the space of only 4 bars, we somehow still have to modulate up a whole step from E-flat to F. Brahms accomplishes this by extending this final dotted portion of the theme into 4 repeating downward scales that each start on E-flat and end on F. This creates an F pedal point, eventually bolstered by this crescendoing timpani roll. But normally at this point in a development section, we expect to hear a dominant pedal point to prepare for the return of the tonic, and this lingering E-flat almost makes this sound like an F7 chord, possibly about to resolve to B-flat major. But of course, this is not what happens. Instead, at the last moment, we hear over the F pedal point this augmented 6th chord that resolves to F major in the next bar. This introduces the original motto, F, A flat, F, starting with an F major chord. But even if you somehow already hear this as the strong tonic beginning of the recapitulation, probably only if you have perfect pitch, Brahms throws in one more harmonic twist when the final F is not harmonized with an F major chord, but instead with the flat 6 chord, D flat major, and the A flat is harmonized by an A flat 7th chord, the 5/7 of flat 6. A second overlapping F A flat F motto now begins on the D flat major chord and returns to the expected diminished 7th chord and then F major chord to introduce the recapitulation of the Schumann theme and the accompanying motto. This harmonic misdirection and unexpected repetition of the motto somehow make this return even more emphatic. To understand how brilliantly strange the transition we just heard is, contrast it with this more conventional transition I discussed, at least in these two final bars of the development, from the opening movement of Bruckner's Sixth Symphony, in which we have a similar crescendoing timpani roll, but instead bolstering the dominant pedal point and dominant 7th chord. Brahms somehow strangely accomplished this same return to the tonic without ever introducing the dominant chord of C major. Remember that the dominant key of C major has been completely absent from this symphony so far, and the C major chord finally makes a brief appearance only in the coda section, which we're about to jump to. The recapitulation section proceeds mostly as expected, but modulates to D major and then D minor instead of the original A major and A minor. I'll let you explore the many other differences on your own time, but I briefly have to mention my favorite. Recall in the exposition section when the groups of 3 confusingly became groups of 2, followed by the reorienting extra beat. When this same moment returns in the recapitulation section, the groups of 3 even more confusingly become smaller groups of 3, really groups of 1.5 subbeats, followed by the same reorienting extra beat. The recapitulation section ends with these same figures, but since we're now in D minor, the second note of the pump fake is F, and is tied to the first note of the F A flat F motto that begins the coda section. The Schumann theme now enters in F major, but the accompanying motto is now for the first time in C minor instead of F minor. For the first time in the symphony, we now have a C pedal point, most easily noticed by looking at these timpani rolls. Interestingly, the timpanist has only played F so far in this symphony, so this is the first time the other drum is required. The Schumann theme is slightly changed to fit with the new harmonization, and we finally end up with our first actual dominant C major chord. So far in this symphony, strangely for Brahms, this main Schumann theme hasn't really been subjected to any significant development. The development section, also strangely for Brahms, mostly just transformed the character and mood of all the themes. Only this red variant of the green theme received the expected Brahmsian treatment in this brief bout of complex counterpoint. However, now in the coda section, Brahms finally deconstructs this Schumann theme, using 3 different short fragments of it as contrapuntal motifs in this final exciting climax. First, the strings repeat this 4-note fragment. Here's the original theme so you can see where it comes from. It now repeats, but closer together and rhythmically out of phase, creating the same kind of hemiola rhythm inherent in the original theme. So starting on the prior page, one of Brahms's favorite methods of intensification, as I've discussed in prior videos, is just to travel up the chromatic scale, which is what these entries do for this entire page. Meanwhile, the winds play entries of this second fragment of the original theme. The strings now continue the out-of-phase repetitions, but with these even closer viola entries and these almost entries from the second violins, it threatens to become a crescendoing, out-of-control cyclone of confusion. Luckily, in one of my favorite Brahms contrabass moments, they come to the rescue, reminding us where the strong beats are with these dramatic figures that continue traveling up the chromatic scale until we reach this unbelievably suspenseful rest. All this built-up energy is now released with these forceful entries of that second motif, but the portion sampled is slightly different from before, with the downbeats accentuated by timpani rolls and the woodwinds, with the other strings continuing to play the first motif. This culminates in one final passionate swell, during which the timpanist, for the only time in the movement, has to play a B-flat. As the energy begins to die down, you'll notice these entries have morphed into those final fragments of the Schumann theme that originally also entered with their inversions. Its first 3 notes are now played more slowly and quietly to introduce the final entry of the orange motto, but accompanied by those same shifted groups of 3 from the closing portion of the exposition section. Of the many versions of the orange motto we've seen in this movement, this is the slowest, and it's harmonized by the same 3 chords that opened the movement. Because of the slow tempo, it's hard to notice this one final reorienting extra beat that introduces the final entries of the Schumann theme, the last one plucked by the lower strings. Now, to end this video, listen uninterrupted to the entire coda section of this movement that started out boldly, but that ends, like every movement of this symphony, in quiet resignation.
Listen, I think it might be just a thing with forensic pathologists. I think they're all smart. I have a buddy who's one, and every time I talk to him, I feel dumb. At least this guy didn't make you feel dumb. He made you feel smarter, if anything else. A whole completely different way to look at classical music when you're going note by note and little section by section, seeing how they compare, where they repeat, how they connect to other symphonies, even other composers. It's a wild journey to see it like this. Actually be looking at the sheet music while you're going through it. I won't say that it can teach you how to read the sheet music, but at least then you know a little something what's going on. At least you can look and know kind of how it's gonna sound, I guess, in my mind. I don't know. Very, very intriguing the entire way through. Shout out to Brian for the request. I appreciate it. I could seriously listen to Richard talk forever. There's something so intriguing about even the words that I didn't understand, even the way that they talk, the way that they describe things, and the real technical terms. Yeah, I don't understand those, but he included things so you could follow along, little pictures here and there that pop up on the screen. I'm appreciative for it because when we got to those points, you remember what he was talking about. Very, very, very interesting video. Get over, show him all the love in the world. Links inside the description. Hit the like button if you liked it. That is the like button, but I won't believe you. Tell the next one of my combustible. You guys be happy, healthy, safe, and love you to the moon and back. Peace.